Okay, let's do it. Hardest bullet point in the whole 2 years. This one. You will not hear me say otherwise for any other bullet point, and if I do, I don't really mean it. This is definitely the hardest one. So, hopefully, you have looked at the video or the screencast that is called "What is Schizophrenia?" You kind of need to have that knowledge beforehand and able to have a clue of being able to do this. So, what we are looking at here is the reliability and the validity of the classification and the diagnosis of schizophrenia. So there's a lot of moving parts with this one. You need to know the validity and the reliability of the classification of schizophrenia, and you need to also know the reliability and the validity for the diagnosis of schizophrenia as well. The video does exist. This will be updated in the slides. But let's have a bit of a recap, right? So we need to start from the very beginning. We need to understand what validity and reliability is. So taking you back to first year, validity is about accuracy. So are we accurately diagnosing something? Like, do doctors accurately diagnose schizophrenia? So that's the diagnosis. Is the classification of schizophrenia accurate? So what we mean by the classification is the DSM, which is what you looked at hopefully in the last screencast. Is that actually what schizophrenia is? So you need to know the validity of the diagnosis of schizophrenia as well as the validity of the classification of schizophrenia as well as alongside pieces of research. So, for example, is there anything else that schizophrenia gets confused with, for example, such as bipolar disorder? Does bipolar disorder look very similar to schizophrenia? Yes, it does. What factors increase or decrease the chances of a successful diagnosis? I should do that. It's going to really irritate me. Reliability, on the other hand, is about consistency. It is about okay, right. It turns out I can't actually do that because my thing is in the other thing. Anyway, so reliability refers to how consistent something is. Are they consistently diagnosed, whether correct or not? So if I give you a case study, man 53 has hallucinations, believe they are God. And if I give that to clinicians in America, the UK, and Borneo, are they consistent in what they say that case study actually is? It's not about whether it's right or wrong, not about whether they... Remember, reliability is not about validity. Do they diagnose it consistently, right? Whether right or wrong. Is the same diagnosis across time, country, psychologist the same? So understanding this is so important, so important. You also need to know, as I say, the difference between diagnosing and classifying. So diagnosing is what a doctor does, right? Or a psychiatrist does, psychologist does. To diagnose a disorder is to identify an illness through looking at symptoms. Classification is what the DSM is. So the DSM outlines what symptoms should be expected with each disorder. So you need to know the difference. Now, you diagnose through the classification, so there is a little bit of overlap, but you also need to know the difference between them. So we need to know the validity and the reliability of this, and the validity and the reliability of this, and what increases and what decreases both the reliability and the validities of both of them. So as you can see, this is a hard bullet point. These slides are not the smoothest to the bullet point because the bullet point is quite a toughie, but all the information that I would say you would need is here. Brief reminder on what delusions is there. I would recommend having a look at that because you do need to know a couple of good examples. But let's start with the first thing. So at its core, there's four main things you need to know here. Not just the validity and the reliability of, I might as well just show you the spec. Not just the validity and the reliability of the diagnosis and the classification, but you need to know comorbidity. I might as well just show you. I might as well just show you, lad. Look how thick this bullet point is just here. So we need to know about the classification of schizophrenia. We did that in the last video. You need to know about the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, including hallucinations and delusions, as well as negative symptoms, including speech, poverty, and avolition. We did all that in the last video. This video, the hardest part is these two lines here. You need to know the reliability and the validity in diagnosing and classifying schizophrenia, including reference to 4 key factors: comorbidity, culture bias, gender bias, and symptom overlap. So we are going to start doing this. We're going to start doing this by focusing on what comorbidity is. So comorbidity is essentially the suffering of 2 disorders alongside one another. So, for example, do you think people just suffer schizophrenia? Do you think people just suffer schizophrenia? No, they tend to suffer other disorders alongside it as well. So comorbidity, if you want a definition, is the simultaneous presence of 2 or more diseases in a patient. So what is schizophrenia suffered with alongside? And again, if you watched the last video, you will actually know this answer. But we need some statistics, and here are some statistics. So Buckley found that comorbidity rates of schizophrenia and depression is 50%. So basically what that means is 50% of schizophrenic sufferers also get diagnosed with depression, for which they then have to take the drugs as well. 29% of schizophrenic sufferers suffer PTSD, and 23% of schizophrenic sufferers have OCD. Substance abuse, as I said in the last video, is also said to be high with 47%. However, here's the complicated bit. And here's the bit I really need you writing down. How does comorbidity affect either the validity or the reliability of the diagnosis or the classification? That's the hard bit. That's the truly, truly hard bit. So as I've said down the bottom, how does the fact that these disorders are so often suffered together affect the accuracy or the reliability of diagnosis or classification? And in this case, what you could argue is it could be argued that comorbidity lowers the validity of the classification. The reason why it does this is because if schizophrenia and depression coexist in 50% of cases, that's not a coincidence, 50% of cases, is it possible they're actually the same thing? Is it possible? Don't think that we know everything about depression. Don't think we know everything about schizophrenia. We don't, because we can't see it. Is it possible that because they're coming up together all the time, they're actually the same thing? Maybe the ones in which they're coming up with schizophrenia and depression is just a worse version of schizophrenia. But at the end of the day, it's all just schizophrenia. So this lowers the accuracy of the DSM. It lowers the accuracy of the DSM. Why does it? Because the DSM may not have some depressive symptoms in there, despite the fact that depression could actually be part of schizophrenia. You may have to watch that a couple of times in order to get your head around it. It is complicated, right? But at the end of the day, this bullet point is going to come up this year. I won't say the year. Now, the other thing you need to know is also symptom overlap. Now, I find this ironic that students get comorbidity and symptom overlap confused. They are quite different. Symptom overlap is a bit more on the name. Are there symptoms that overlap between the disorders, so they appear in both disorders? Do you think hallucination is just a schizophrenic disorder, like a symptom? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Hallucinations can come up with anxiety. They can come up with severe depression. They can come up with bipolar. They can come up with schizoaffective disorders, brief psychotic episode, or they can come up if you're just stressed. You know, it's actually really common for teenagers to have hallucinations under severe stress. It doesn't mean they're schizophrenic. So the point I'm trying to make here is if someone comes to you and says, "Doctor, I've got hallucinations and delusions," does that mean they have schizophrenia? No, because of symptom overlap. So without even going into any detail, I can tell you that this affects the validity of diagnosing. Symptom overlap affects the validity of diagnosis, because if someone comes to you and says, "Doctor, I've got this symptom," and here's the important bit, there's no one symptom that is exclusive solely to schizophrenia. Do you know what I mean? So if someone, I don't know, this is an extreme example. But let's just say that shaving your head and then dancing around like a chicken was a symptom of schizophrenia, and just schizophrenia, right? It is single-handedly just a schizophrenic episode. As soon as someone would do that, we'd think, boom, schizophrenia, that's easy. The problem is there is no symptom like that in anything, by the way. There is no symptom like that in schizophrenia where it's solely schizophrenic. So, and as we can see here, these are symptom overlap examples between schizophrenia and bipolar. So as you can see, there's a lot in the middle. So both of these disorders share aggression, agitation, anxiety, mood swings, psychotic thinking, impulsivity, depression, suicidal thoughts, cognitive deficits. There are some symptoms here, and you might think, well, hold on a second, these are exclusive to schizophrenia. No, because these symptoms are exclusive to depression, for example. So there's no symptom that is exclusive to schizophrenia. And that actually really affects, as I say, the validity to diagnoses, as there is no schizophrenia specific symptom. So as it says here, schizophrenia is regarded as a heterogeneous, I can never say that, heterogeneous disorder, which is the idea that symptoms can present themselves in very, very different ways. So, for example, as opposed to homogeneous. If I put two people with schizophrenia next to each other, they can look completely different. I could have one person thinking that they're God next to one person who looks, for all intents and purposes, like they have depression. So there's a couple of good terms to be able to note down here. But I think it does affect the ability of medical professionals to diagnose accurately if the symptoms they're seeing come up in other disorders. So symptom overlap is quite an important part. A couple of extra bits to do with it, which I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but it's worth noting down. So you probably want to pause to go through. But symptom overlap there. You've also got a little bit of symptom overlap. Given that schizophrenia could be argued to be an amalgamation of other disorders, this is the thing. Is schizophrenia actually a disorder? Is it genuinely actually a disorder? Like, the simple answer is yes, but in the next DSM that comes out, it may not be. It may be recognised that actually schizophrenia is just three disorders that you're suffering separately, but make it look like it's one disorder. Or maybe schizophrenia is a bit like the atom, you need to split it open to see what sort of stuff's in there. Maybe we can then categorize and classify disorders a little bit better. Is schizophrenia actually a thing? Because I'm not being funny, but the schizophrenia breadth of symptoms is so wide, actually it probably is different disorders, that we haven't yet classified or clarified properly, and we will do in future DSMs. So more research needs to be done. So it does raise the question, and you need to be able to argue this. Third point is culture bias. So there's two biases that I'm going to go through now, culture bias and gender bias. I don't think I actually got a slide for gender bias. No, I didn't. So I've really broken this down quite a bit. Culture bias. Is there a chance that you will diagnose based on your culture? So I've got an example just here, but cultural biases in diagnosing or classifying schizophrenia refer to the notion, and here's the important bit, clinicians or doctors will diagnose patients based on the doctor's culture, not necessarily the context or the culture of where the patient is from. For example, if you've got an old white British doctor and they've got an African patient who is having hallucinations and their mental health isn't that well, do we really think the doctor is going to take into account the African culture from which that individual is from? Absolutely not. They're going to go to the DSM. What does the British norm say I should do here? And that's a really difficult thing. The problem is the symptom pool. Now, if you remember from psychopathology last year, we talked about the symptom pool. Each culture has a pool of symptoms which it associates with certain disorders. So, for example, in Western depression, you are low. You have feelings of worthlessness. You socially withdraw. But in Eastern Asian depression, there are other symptoms like koro, for example, the feeling that your genitals are going up into your body. So you have to the doctors have to take into account the culture from which somebody comes from when they're diagnosing. Because let me ask you this, is hallucinations exclusively seen as a schizophrenic episode across the world? No, it's not. We've already looked at this in the last video where it said actually people who have a religious tint to their hallucinations or their delusions, in some cultures, that is seen as a perfectly normal experience. In fact, it's seen as a rewarding, generous experience, for example. So the doctor's only going to diagnose the patient according to British norms of mental health, which may not necessarily be right for that particular patient. And this was seen by Cochrane, who found that in the Windies, the West Indies, so Caribbean islands, if you will, in the Caribbean islands, schizophrenia rate is 1%. Right? In Britain, schizophrenia rate is 1%. But when you've got Afro-Caribbean men coming from the West Indies to Britain, bringing their culture with them, Afro-Caribbean men, the rate goes up from 1% up to 7%. So they're much more likely going to suffer schizophrenia in Britain than the Windies, because we see some of their behavior as schizophrenic. They don't, because it isn't to them. So the culture of the doctors is really, really important here, right? It's really, really important. But what you need to do is understand how this affects the reliability or the validity of the diagnosis or the classification. And to answer this question, cultural bias lowers the reliability in classifying schizophrenia. We've got the DSM. It's not here, so I'm just going to pretend that this is the DSM. We've got the DSM, and the idea of the DSM is to actually standardize and improve the reliability of mental health across the world. But the problem is each culture has different symptoms for different disorders, known as the symptom pool. Can do that again. And therefore, this lowers the reliability. So it lowers the consistency across the cultures, because in some African cultures, some Caribbean cultures, hallucinations is normal, but in some British cultures, in British culture, hallucination is not a normal, healthy behavior, and that lowers the reliability. Now, the last one is gender bias. So we have gender bias. Technically, it's sex bias, but we have gender bias a lot for many different behaviors. If a male were to go to the doctor and say they were feeling low and they were feeling, like they didn't want to be with their friends or something, because we know females get depression more often and more likely than males, the doctor may think, oh, you're male, it's probably not depression, and may misdiagnose them. The same thing occurs for schizophrenia. So Longnecker reviewed studies of schizophrenia and concluded that since the 80s, the rate with which males have been getting diagnosed has been growing a lot quicker than females. So the basic of this is there a chance that if a female goes with hallucinations or delusions, they may get misdiagnosed because the doctor thinks, women don't get schizophrenia that much. Therefore, it must be something else. It must be schizoaffective disorder. Maybe it's bipolar, for example. Is there a chance they are going to actually misdiagnose. So gender bias lowers the reliability of diagnosis across the sexes. So, for example, there is no consistency between the sexes. Validity of diagnosing can also be affected as well. So you can argue both sides to this. Reliability of diagnosis and validity of diagnosis are both affected because the doctor could assume that the hallucinations are the result of schizophrenia in a male patient, but may be reluctant to diagnose it in a female patient. So in terms of discussing this, what you kind of need to do is be able to argue that maybe an idiographic approach would be better. What we mean by an idiographic approach is a case-by-case judgment on the diagnosis instead of referring to DSMs and manuals and going on nomothetic laws. So an idiographic approach would absolutely be better. Now, there are a couple of pieces of evidence here that you do need to know. I'm just going to pause this here. This shouldn't be here, but this is for symptom overlap. This is a bit of AO3 here, that we're going through. And you also definitely need to know Rosenhan's research. Rosenhan's research is one of my favorite pieces of research ever conducted. They basically faked their way into mental hospitals by pretending they had schizophrenia. And as soon as the door shut behind them, they were told, all 12 of them, technically it was 8, but I won't go into that. All 12 of them, they were told, as soon as you get in, just act normal and see how long it takes you for people to realize that you are actually normal. And I believe the longest person in there was in there for 59 days. Now, this shows us that the validity of diagnosis, these people did not have schizophrenia, but yet they all got diagnosed with schizophrenia. So the validity of schizophrenia, the validity of diagnosis, is actually incredibly shaky because they were all misdiagnosed, basically. So there's honestly, read Rosenhan's research, even if it's just a summary, right? It's fascinating what he did, and they hate him. I think he's actually written up in that piece of research just there, opening Skinner's box. It's a brilliant piece of research. So in terms of evaluation, this is probably the hard bit, I think. Your evaluations have got to be mostly research. So use Cochrane, use what's the one there's a piece of research, the name is escaping me at the moment, but it was looking at culture bias, the difference between American psychologists and British psychologists about their reliability of diagnosing. I can't remember off the top of my head. What's the name? It's really going to piss me off. No, you know what? Hold on. Sorry. I'm sure I thought this was in the slides, but if we have a look, consistency of UK and US psychiatrists in diagnosing schizophrenia. Come on, talk to me. You will not. Wait, hold on. I might have actually. Right, let's try this one again. Consistency of, and if I go to, you know what, I might put it on the comments box. I don't know. That's really going to annoy me that I can't figure that out. Anyway, sorry. The tough part of this is going to be the AO3. So what I've done, and please make a note of this, is I've written a couple of model answers, which I'm actually going to go through because I think they are quite important here. So the first one here, the desire to standardize mental health norms in schizophrenia across the world through the DSM fails to take into account cultural differences in schizophrenia symptoms. That's my point. Now, what I need to do is evidence this. Where is my evidence that it fails to take into account cultural differences? Well, for example, I'm going to bring in Cochrane's research here that Afro-Caribbean men were 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia due to the hallucinations show different symptom pools of the disorder. Hallucinations are seen as less of a mental health concern than in Western culture, right? But now I need to elaborate on this. So let me ask. So I've said a point, I've given it evidence, but why is this point important? One thing you have to ask yourself when it comes to the elaborations is, why is this point important? What is a consequence of this point? What's a consequence of the fact that it fails to take into account cultural differences? Well, a consequence of this is an increasing occurrence of misdiagnosis across cultures due to the DSM's ignorance of symptom pools. The DSM, whilst improving reliability and trying to keep it consistent across cultures, may actually be reducing the validity of diagnosis. And therefore, the DSM should be used as a guide in conjunction with the culture of the patient. You'll notice that the point and the link back are shorter and sharper. The meat of the point is in the middle, but this is the structure you need to. If you miss out your elaborations, you're basically leaving the examiner to go, so what? So what? Why is your point important? The second one I want to go through here, and it's whatever. It could be argued that the diagnosis of schizophrenic patients can never escape the damaging subjectivity of a doctor's interpretation. Now, this is the hardest AO3s you're going to get, to be perfectly honest. These are the hardest AO3s you're going to get. So reading these model answers should be hopefully quite useful. Again, I need to evidence this. How can I evidence this? It could be argued that the diagnosis of schizophrenic patients can never escape the damaging subjectivity of a doctor's interpretation. So basically what I'm saying is there is no objective, factual, indisputable way to diagnose schizophrenia. It always has to come down to a doctor going, oh, I think this based on my experiences and my training, because I'm. So the evidence in this case, I'm going to bring in Rosenhan. Remember, you don't always have to bring in research, but it's just an easy example. Rosenhan's research showed that no objective method of diagnosing mental health exists, and that doctors can easily be persuaded of the existence of a disorder when it doesn't actually exist. Due to the lack of reliable physical markers, and what I mean by that is basically like you seeing something physical in someone's body that says that's absolutely schizophrenia, like lowered serotonin or something like that. Due to the lack of reliable physical markers, diagnosing schizophrenia will likely remain subjective for the foreseeable future. So what? What's a consequence of this point? Well, given this lack of objectivity, the medical field needs to be open to the possibility of getting it wrong, unlike the doctors in Rosenhan's research who were adamant they got it right. The diagnosing of schizophrenia remains invalid and arguably, and this is me slagging off a little bit, the result of total guesswork. Now that's quite a strong statement, but I like my students to have that strength in their statements, to have that convictions in their point, right? Slag off the pieces of research, right? Criticize them. That's what you're going to be doing at uni. Therefore, further work needs to be done to identify less opinion-based forms of diagnosing patients. I would recommend writing these 2 points down. I'd like getting the essence of the points. These AO3s are really, really tough. In terms of essay questions, to be honest, I would argue this is one of the only questions that my students will fear at the end of it. Look at this question. Discuss the reliability and or validity in relation to the diagnosis and classification of schizophrenia. And it's just an 8 marker. You can talk about that for 32 marks, let alone 8. So it's a really, really tough bullet point. You may, to be honest, I know it's going to suck, but you may have to watch that video a couple of times through in order to wrap your head around it. But the main thing you need to know is how do comorbidity, symptom overlap, culture bias, and gender bias affect the validity or the reliability of the diagnosis or the classification of schizophrenia. There's a lot of moving parts to this point. It's a toughie. You may have to watch it a couple of times. This is the hardest part of the spec. It does not get easier it does not get harder from here. So if you can nail this bullet point, you do not want to walk into the paper 3 with this as a weak point, because if a 16 marker comes up, you're done, basically. You're done. Hope it is useful. Watch this a couple of times. Peace out.